Good morning, Bimblers. And you join me here at Budworth Mere. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. Budworth Mere is just on the outskirts of Northwich. And I've been meaning for a while to come to Northwich because I'm a Cheshire lad and I've hardly done any bimbles around Cheshire. So I did some research and I found that we might have to do several videos on Northwich. So this video is going to be called Northwich 1. But let's stop messing about. Let's bimble. Maybe it didn't work at the time. Maybe it never did. A mistake that made the distance, or a trying way to live. Maybe it's the time that you grabbed at my arms and electricity flowed from my shoulders to palms in a white hot glow, leaving white cold scars left bare and on show just to prove they were ours. Maybe it worked, maybe it never did, maybe it never was quite like how it is. Maybe it didn't work at the time, maybe it never did. A novelty improvement left lonely as it gave. Maybe it's the time that you closed both your eyes and you pouted your lips as you waited for mine in the soft red glow of your soft cold arms. Serotonin burnt holes through my veins to my heart. Maybe it worked, maybe it never did. Well, Bimblers, the coat's off. It's rather warm today. You wouldn't know from looking about, but we're in the middle of a heat wave here at the moment. After today, there's weather warnings saying that there's a risk of life because of the heat. So luckily, we've chosen a day to come bimbling where it's very grey and overcast and quite drab looking. But we soldier on. We're here at Pickmere Lake, and it was formed millions of years ago when the Ice Age ended and all the glaciers shifted and created this lake. Pickmere Lake and the surrounding area of Pickmere was first mentioned in the 12th century, and nobody's quite sure where the name comes from. It's either literal pike mere, meaning a mere or a lake that was filled with pike, or the other explanation is that the land was given to a Hugh de Pike-mere, and he was given the land by Edward I, Big Longshanks. He gave Mr. Pike-mere the land around here as a thank you for helping him build a castle in Beaumaris on the Isle of Anglesey. It was one of many castles that Edward I built in Wales during what was called the First Welsh War, and I've said it 1,000 times on this channel. The First Welsh War is a stupid name for that war, because the Welsh and the English had been fighting for centuries before that. The castle was built by Edward I as part of his Iron Ring, a series of castles all the way around Wales, which he used to keep his eye on the Welsh. And I promise we'll no doubt bimble to that castle in the future as well. But if we zoom through history to the 20th century, that's where Pickmere Lake comes into its own, as a place for day trippers, people on their bikes, people on coaches and charabancs, even later on people in their own motor cars, all coming to Pickmere Lake on Sundays and bank holidays. The Silcox Travelling Fair used to visit here quite frequently, and in the end they ended up setting up a fairground here permanently. There used to be a pleasure steamer called the Princess Irene that used to sail around the lake. And if you're a fan of the TV show The Royal Family, well, Nana rented a rowing boat here at Pickmere Lake, and she was only supposed to have it for 30 minutes, but she took it for 40 minutes and was met with a frosty reception by the fellow that rented it to her. In 1990, the family that owned the fair retired, and the people that bought it didn't really look after it very well. They let it get run down, and in fact that pleasure steamer, the Princess Irene, was sunk in the middle. It's what us salty sea dogs call scuttling. It's where you purposely sink a boat so that you don't have to scrap it or refurb it or sell it to someone. It's just a way of getting rid of a boat. But it's not just the olden days that we're talking about round here. They have a futuristic element in Pickmere. They have one of the radio telescopes from Jodrell Bank. And it's called Merlin, and that stands for Multi-Element Radio-Linked Interferometer Network, according to my big Bimble book. But we're not getting space age in this Bimble. We're getting salty. So we should Bimble. Let's Bimble. This is Lyons Salt Works, and salt was big business here in Northwich, and it was big business in Nantwich, and it was big business in Middlewich. In fact, the witch bit of all three of those towns comes from the Norse for Salt Bay, not Salt Bay, but Salt Bay. You've heard me talk about the Mersey Valley and how it used to be a desert on the equator before all the tectonic plates shifted in the Triassic era. Well, next to that desert was a sea, very much like the Dead Sea, where nothing could live in it. It was just a very salty sea. And with it being next door to a desert, the water would evaporate off. And year on year, that sea got saltier and saltier. You couple that with the sand blowing in from the desert, and eventually all the water goes away, and you end up with rock salt. You wait a couple of million years and a load of soil forms on the top of it, about 150 metres of soil. That's about one Blackpool Tower's worth of soil. And the rock salt gets hidden away and the tectonic plates shift, and it all ends up here in the northwest of England, where it rains all the time, and that rainwater filters through the soil and into the rock salt and dissolves it. And every now and again, a briny spring would erupt from the surface of the earth. 6 to 8 times more salty than seawater. A gift from the gods, it was thought. That's certainly what the Romans thought. It's half the reason why they used Chester as their main port. The Romans loved salt so much that they used to pay their soldiers in salt. In fact, that's where we get the word salary from. Salt salary. It's also where we get the turn of phrase, worth his salt. It basically just means worth his wages, but they were paid in salt. Initially, that salty sea, right by the equator next to a desert, you would have found it easy to evaporate out the water. And even today, in countries that make salt, they use the power of the sun. They make a lot of sea salt in Australia, and all they do is fill up a tub full of seawater, and by the end of the day the sun has evaporated all the water and just left the sea salt. You can't do that in Northwich, because you only get about 2 minutes of sun a day, and I think we've had it for today. So here in Northwich, you had to burn coal underneath giant lead pans, and they used to use lead because it was the least reactive with the salt. It didn't mean they didn't react, it was just the least reactive. And they would boil off all the water into steam and just leave salt, and they would make something called salt cake. And that's what they used to do here at Lyons Salt Works. Right up until the 1980s. The only reason that they stopped making the salt was because their biggest buyer wasn't buying it anymore. They used to export salt to Nigeria. But in the 1970s, they had a massive civil war. Even after the civil war ended, they still had uprisings and they still had guerrilla warfare. So unfortunately, Lyons Salt Works had to close. But it's not all bad, because they made it into a lovely museum for you to learn all about the salt industry here in Northwich. And they still have some of the lead salt pans on display. Now you might be asking yourself, dissolving all that salt under the earth, does it have an effect on the surface? Well, yes it does. So I think we should leg Bimble to one of Northwich's flashes. Let's Bimble. You join me at Neumann's Flash, and I'm stood in front of one of those funny little bird watching huts, trying to shelter from the wind. The wind's rather picked up, and I thought I may as well be near one of these bird watching shelters, because everyone thinks I'm a bird watcher anyway. If only they knew the truth. It's much geekier than they think. I'm making a YouTube video about the history of salt in Cheshire. If you've watched one of my other videos, my Pennington Flash video, you'll know what a flash is. It's a big hole that fills up with water that's formed because of mining underneath the ground. The mines under the ground collapse and it fills up with water, and you get one of these, a flash. The flashes in Wigan are caused by digging for coal, but the flashes here in Northwich are caused by digging for salt. And during the Industrial Revolution, salt was big business. And the men that dug out the salt weren't careful about it. You might think that we only use salt in our fish and chips. Well, no. We needed it for all kinds of other things. Salt is sodium chloride. If you take the sodium out, you're left with chlorine. And if you've got chlorine, you can make bleach. In Warrington, Widnes and Runcorn we made a lot of bleach, we made a lot of soap, and we made a lot of chemicals. We had a lot of alkali factories. And the salt they used all came from here near Northwich, Middlewich and Nantwich. You need salt to make glass, and that's what they made in St Helens. And they needed twice as much salt in St Helens to make their glass, because you buy one and you get one free. I say you buy one and you get one free. Even the cotton mills in Manchester or Cottonopolis, they needed salt. They needed salt to make soap so that they could clean the cotton. And then they needed bleach made from salt so that they could bleach the cotton so it would be brilliant white. Then they needed all kinds of other chemical compounds, all involved with salt, to dye the cloth. And then finally, they needed just pure salt to wash the cloth in. That would soften the fabric. The need for salt was great, and the men that mined it didn't care whether it all fell in or how dangerous it was to get it out. And when the mines became too dangerous to send men down, which, if you think about in the Victorian era, would have been very, very, very dangerous, they decided just to flush them out with lukewarm water, so that all the salt would dissolve into the water. Then they could send it to Lyne Salt Works and have it evaporated off. And that lukewarm water dissolved what little supports they had underneath the ground, holding us all up. I think we'll leave looking at the mock Tudor buildings of Northwich until Northwich 2. For now, we need to know how they got all that salt out into the River Mersey. Let's bimble.
Over time, clouds kept the light from those eyes. Still, love grown consumed, and you know I'll never let it go. You'll find in time, I'll never let it go. You'll find it's right. I'll only ever know how to speak my mind. I'll only ever know how to speak my mind. Over time, clouds kept the light from those eyes. Still, love grown consumed, and you know I'll never let it go. You'll find in time, I'll never let it go. You'll find it's right. I'll only ever know how to speak my mind. I'll only ever know how to speak my mind. My mind.
We just bimbled down the Trent and Mersey Canal. It's 93.5 miles long, and it starts in Staffordshire and ends in a place called Preston Brook, which is just outside of Runcorn. At that point, it runs into the Bridgewater Canal and then runs into Runcorn, where it would have met with the River Mersey. That was before they built the Manchester Ship Canal. From 1894 onwards, it would have gone into the Manchester Ship Canal. But these days, it just stops in Runcorn. But apparently they're doing something about that. But what kind of engineer did they task with such a feat as a 93.5 mile long canal? Well, it's friend of the channel, James Brindley again. The same fella that built the Bridgewater Canal and got all the water out of the Wet Earth Colliery. The canal opened in 1777, which was 11 years after an Act of Parliament said that they could dig it. That's because they couldn't decide which way they wanted it to go. They knew they wanted to link the River Trent with the River Mersey, but they couldn't decide which businesses they wanted to pass by. James Brindley wanted to link the River Trent, the River Mersey, the River Severn and the River Thames in something he called his Grand Cross. A Josiah Wedgwood wanted it to pass by his factory. And if you've watched enough episodes of Flog It or Bargain Hunt, you'll know that Wedgwood pottery was quite the thing. And you can imagine that he didn't like his pottery going by cart horse. Mr. Wedgwood actually dug the first sod for the Trent and Mersey Canal. So he managed to get his way, and he did in fact build a factory along the canal. For the industry in Northwich, they already had a way into the River Mersey. That was called the Weaver Navigation. They'd spent a load of money and built a load of infrastructure to make it so that boats could get down the River Weaver. Before then, it was a very shallow river. Now it was a lovely deep one, and big Mersey flats could get down it. But as much as they weren't keen on the Trent and Mersey Canal, eventually they wanted a piece of it. And they wanted to join the Weaver navigation to the Trent and Mersey Canal. And there was only one problem. The Trent and Mersey Canal is 50 foot above the Weaver navigation. So as you can see behind me, they built a rather large contraption called the Anderton Boat Lift. And it was built in 1875 and designed and overseen by a man called Edward Leader Williams. You may recognise him as the chief engineer for the Manchester Ship Canal. He's the man that designed all the swing bridges on the Manchester Ship Canal. He also designed the Barton Swing Aqueduct, which we've bimbled to in the past. And he also designed the UK's most controversial bridge, the Warburton Bridge, the one that they're raising the toll on for the first time in 100 and odd years. We'll speak more about the Weaver navigation in Northwich 2, whenever that comes out.